Greetings all, and welcome to the 42nd episode of the VTP, or the Veteran Trainer's Perspective. Today, we are going to be taking a look at perhaps one of the greatest and most fundamental questions to ever be asked about in the Pokémon franchise. A question that has plagued the minds of players and lovers of the franchise ever since the franchise itself ever really debuted. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be tackling the hardest question to ever truly be asked in the franchise in all of its history, and that is defining what a Pokemon actually is.
Now, it might seem like a simple question to even ask what a Pokemon even is, but the simplicity of this particular question is what makes it so enticing to try and understand, for the answer to it is anything but easy to understand. While it might have been much easier to answer in the earlier days of the franchise, today, there are now so many different types of Pokemon that to create a definition that truly does answer this and makes it clear just what they all are is a daunting task that many have tried to do using some sort of simple explanation for how they all fit together and fit the human race as a part of their own world. However, I do believe that an answer can be created, but rather than trying to shoehorn a vague answer into the situation to try and define them based on arbitrary words connected to us alone, an approach taken by most others, I think that the only way we can truly come to an understanding and definition for what a Pokemon is to break them all down piece by piece and build a definition for them from scratch. And that's what I plan on doing here today as the purpose of this video.
In addressing this question, the first thing that I feel needs to be talked about is where Pokemon even come from, and in that statement we must understand that there are several different avenues of answering the question to consider here.
First of all, there's the actual real-life origins of these creatures, originally envisioned as capsule monsters, given that they were contained inside capsules, a feature that's still present today, before earning the title of pocket monsters. These creatures were made as beasts that could be captured and battled with his partners in the heat of a confrontation, something that we will be getting into more later on, but overall were also creatures that the human race shared the world with, and with the origin comes a way to use and battle with these sorts of creatures in the real world in a way that only been touched upon previously by games like Shin Megami Tensei. Within the franchise's universe, we can look back at these species and their depictions of the early days and observe there was a lot of differences to be seen in their designs and the way in which they were treated by people compared to today, something that could be seen as a holdover in the design of some trainers like the original Team Rocket Grunt designs and the Tamer trainer class. As far as the Pokemon themselves go, however, it is a massive topic of debate as to what the first Pokemon truly was. Was it Arceus, for it was said in Sinnoh legend that he is the true creator of the entire universe? Is it Mew for being touted as the genetic ancestors of all Pokemon? Is it Bulbasaur for being the very first Pokemon in the Pokédex? Is it Rhydon for being the first Pokemon to survive the beta stage of Generation 1 development? These and other possible creatures are all good answers for an otherwise vague question, but it gets even more complicated when we really seek the natural world for an answer with many deities of a sort representing the very elements and structures of our planet and its long history. But for this discussion, the piece we simply need to answer is when Pokemon truly originated. And if we are to consider beings like Arceus to be a Pokemon, then the first thing that we can really say is that these entities are beings whose origins, at least biologically, put them as existing in their own way at the dawn of the universe itself.
Given that we can define them as beings that have existed in some form or another since the dawn of creation, we next need to tackle the Pokemon themselves, and in particular, how they stack up as far as biology and physical attributes are concerned. And this one is a real can of worms.
On the one hand, it is easy to just look at Pokemon and see them as monsters, or just living creatures of some sort, but this is barely able to scratch the surface on the criteria we can use to define them, and there are several reasons for why this simple assumption just doesn't work well in practice. Sure, a lot of Pokemon are indeed animals, living creatures of some sort just as humans are, but there are also many different forms of life that honestly force us to challenge the definition of what it means to be a living creature in this context. As an easy example to challenge this definition, we have Pokemon like the members of the Voltorb and Magnemite families, who by definition are machines in their overall bodily structure and nature, and yet are considered to be Pokemon. While they might be alive in a colloquial sense, they are not organic in nature as we would otherwise define them in reality, so we are stuck here with the consequence of a vague definition of life with their inclusion. Such entities also push the boundary of what be considered a living being with the real-world definition of what it means to even be a living creature, as in real life we have entities that seem to act just like that in the form of viruses. We define a living creature by many factors, but one of the chief points of interest right here is that they're able to make more of their kind on their own. Many viruses do not have that capacity, so they are sometimes not really seen as truly being alive in that sense. With Voltorb and Magnemite, the same sort is true, as they cannot make offspring with others of their kind through the understored forms of reproduction, requiring the use of a Ditto in the games in order for trainers to make more of them. This goes for automatons as well, like the members of the Baltoy and Golett families, which also explains why these entities do not have a gender or sex that can be assigned to them via traditional standards. However, this is not to say that they are truly sexless, merely genderless, since they can make more of their own kind under specific circumstances. We also need to consider this when we look at legendary and mythical Pokémon, as while some of them are alive in a traditional biological sense, at the same time there are many, especially deity-class legendaries, that do fit the mold of being alive biologically with organ systems and the like, but cannot make more of their own kind and instead are virtual gods of a sort, their immense power helping to shape the universe and our planet as we know it. And then we get to ghosts, and we have to throw the book out for the most part once we even start to get close to those sorts of Pokemon. So, where can we really go from here? Well, I think that in order to come to an answer of some sort with this aspect, we really need to take a good, long, hard look at this and do something quite radical, and that is to not throw out the attempt to define them as living creatures, but to throw out the definition commonly compared to them. That is to say, to change the definition of what it means to be alive in this context. To fit with the world of Pokemon, we need to see that, by definition, Pokemon are living entities in that they are entities with an animated and conscious sense of mind and self, entities that recognize themselves and thus know they exist and live in that sense. After all, if they could not perceive their own existence and those of others around them, how would they even be able to execute moves or listen to trainers in battle? To put it simply as possible, as the adage goes, I think, therefore I am. There must be a sense of self-awareness as far as their existence goes, so for that, I think we can say that Pokemon are indeed living creatures, but based on the sense of self-existence and interactions with the world around them, counter to any biological or otherwise physical attributes that might tie them to that definition directly.
With that established, we next need to take a step into the science zone for a bit, and try to take our new definition of what it means to be alive, and try and order the life forms that comprise the world of Pokemon. And this is where it can get really dicey, because we have to tackle the issue of binomial nomenclature, the system of naming organisms.
This study is essential in the real world, to not just identifying the many different types of life forms that exist in the real world, but it's essential in being able to understand the genetic and evolutionary relationships that exist between different creatures over the span of time and evolution on this planet. This aspect of science is not usually an easy task for most. In fact, it can be downright frustrating because the true relation between different organisms can be based on many, many different factors, including the overall behavior, physiology, and genetic relations, and the lattermost factor is the one that has proven to be incredibly insightful and the bane of many researchers in any field of study that involves understanding the life that has and still exists on our world. At the very least though, in the real world, as much of a headache as it can be to truly define and understand the relationships that connect all life together, we can all work from the understanding and assumption that, for the overwhelming majority of cases, we are dealing with biological creatures that can share at least some basic attributes with each other and that can give us a few strands to build an arbitrary web out of, and then go from there. However, as I mentioned before, viruses, though still considered under binomial nomenclature, are not always defined as being alive in a traditional definition, and thus it makes it clear that you don't even always have to fit the bill of the definition of life to be considered a part of the system. This actually makes things a bit easier for us though, as it means that all Pokemon can be defined with the system, even with descriptive species titles, and thus relationships between them can be inferred and classified, even if they might sometimes be a tenuous connection at best. However, in saying this, there is one note that needs to be made that might seem to throw a monkey wrench into all of this, and that is the fact that binomial nomenclature is almost never used in the games to define and name Pokemon. While this might not seem strange on its own given that in the real world, many species have colloquial terms and names that are used for them on top of the species name, the two nonetheless go together in literature. Yet, when we talk about Pokemon, it is almost always with their general colloquial name and almost never their scientific name. This persists even in scientific literature, so what gives here? Well, to that I think that it's much less about the science of the issue, and much more so the use of these general names by the public. While scientific research into Pokemon might be paramount to studying them, they are seen and used by the public much more so in one form than another, and unlike with the real world, all Pokemon have a colloquial name that they are referred to with by the public at large, and that can definitely not be said about the real world. As such, while we might prefer to use their scientific name in research and articles in the real world, the general public's understanding and naming of Pokemon based solely on their colloquial name makes it far more convenient to use that in place of the species name. Therefore, we can add here that Pokemon are organisms that are also defined by binomial nomenclature, but are described and referred to by the colloquial names due to societal and literary convenience.
Next, let's really get into the nitty-gritty of what really defines the attributes and powers of Pokemon, and start by talking about elemental types.
Pokemon types are derived from factors regarding the overall physical elemental structure of their forms and help to define not just what they are from a classification standpoint as highlighted above, but also the sorts of powers and moves they can use in and out of battle in order to fight others and defend themselves. Currently, there are 18 recognized elemental types, each with its own special attributes and with advantages and disadvantages over other types in a way that makes it just like rock, paper, scissors, a game that really helps to show how these creatures function from a biological and non-biological standpoint. Some of these types can be seen with rather plain features, like the normal or fighting types, and have their signature attributes merely based on the physical attributes of a Pokemon, while others like the grass, water, and fire types instead show a stronger natural basis and literal energy-based attacks that affect opponents in a non-physical manner. Of course, there are also physical and special attacks for each type, so there is a bit of both sides to every element, and that isn't even mentioning the different techniques that are defined by different standards that show off the full capabilities of a Pokemon in any sort of confrontation, or even just as part of their daily lives. Moreover, Pokemon are not limited to just a single type as well, as some types of Pokemon can potentially have two different types that exist together as a reflection of a greater variety of powers that they naturally develop throughout their lives. This then naturally divides them into primary and secondary types, with their primary type defining the core biology and structure of their form, and the secondary type being existing as an additive that reflects specialized attributes that they have also developed in order to augment their forms for the sake of greater survivability and access to power. Altogether, this means that Pokemon are entities that are different elemental types that define the overall form based on its structure and any specialized powers that they can wield naturally that amplifies their base attributes for some survival purpose.
There is also the issue of evolution to consider here, an aspect of the Pokemon world that is essential to the lives of trainers in every sense.
One of the chief hallmarks of Pokemon is that many species undergo a developmental life cycle of some sort and evolve into other types of Pokemon, starting out in a juvenile state of some sort and eventually growing into a different adult form, either through natural maturation or from other processes that can be utterly unique to some species, and each stage of life in this fashion is considered to be an entirely different type of Pokemon. There are many creatures in the real world that undergo this exact same process, and while this means that there are some types of Pokemon, such as many bug types that go from a caterpillar stage of some sort to a winged final stage, that also means that more unusual types of evolution may be needed to bring out a Pokemon's full potential in practice. However, at the same time, it is noted that not all types of Pokemon have the capacity to, or even need to evolve, instead existing as standalone entities that merely grow in power and strength gradually over time. This is especially evident with many legendary Pokemon, and because of this, we can't necessarily use this attribute in our definition of what a Pokemon is directly. Indirectly, however, we can comment on the fact that when Pokemon do evolve, it is something that does not gradually happen, instead undergoing a process of rapid mutation that changes their form in the span of only a few moments, thus giving us something to define them by here. It may apply only to those with evolutions, but it is still something to place one's hat on, so to speak.
The natural abilities that Pokemon possess are also important to mention here, as is a criterion for defining them, as it is a feature that they all possess in common with each other.
When I speak of abilities here, I am specifically referring to the special powers that Pokemon possesses as a consequence of their anatomy or behavior that adds onto their capabilities in battle, modifying their combat attributes in some manner or another. All Pokemon have a single ability that they can possess, though for some types, they have multiple abilities that they can possibly possess to choose from, and it grants them special bonuses that can open up the door for new strategies in battle and even potentially aid trainers and people in general in some manner outside of a battle. While they might only be a single feature for the many different attributes that define a Pokemon, they nonetheless are worth noting here because of their shared universal nature, even if some of them might be a bit stranger than others.
Further from this, we can also make note of the moves that Pokemon possess, an attribute that feeds into the usage within battles and other sorts of acts of competition against other Pokemon.
Pokemon are unique among the many other life forms that populate this planet, in that they have access to special moves, namely attacks and techniques that they can use to affect other Pokemon, sometimes in positive ways and sometimes negative, but as a whole, they serve not only as a source of protection in the wild, but as a way to make it possible to go head-to-head with other creatures to see who is truly the strongest among them. These sorts of moves require some level of stamina to them, and are based on a system of stats to help to illustrate the various powers and combat capabilities of different species. And while I won't go into the nitty-gritty details of it all here, it is important to note this, as it ties into the ways in which Pokemon are used by humans. It is further noted that these creatures have the capacity to hold and use items that are given to them, either to consume or to garner some sort of direct effect in a battle scenario, giving humans the opportunity to really trick out their Pokemon and make them show the true versatility that is at their disposal.
And of course, leading from that, we need to discuss the ways in which Pokemon are used by humans to fully understand what exactly brings them so much closer to humanity than any other type of life form on this planet.
When people tend to look at and think about Pokemon, the one thing that often comes to mind almost immediately are Pokemon battles, the most common way in which people and Pokemon interact with each other in sport. In these sorts of competitions, the goal is simple but direct, in that one side must use the Pokémon to defeat the Pokémon possessed by other trainers, namely by fighting them until one side runs out of energy and is knocked out cold. This can involve a seemingly infinite number of strategies and move combinations that could really challenge not just the skill of a trainer and how they use their Pokémon, but the sheer power and tactical capabilities of Pokémon themselves, showcasing what their powers can truly accomplish when pushed to the limit. This is not the only thing that humans use Pokémon for, however, merely the most popular. There are also Pokémon contests to consider, which tend to be less violent and focus more on the showmanship of trainers and their Pokémon, using moves and other factors of appeal to wow judges and show a brilliant performance of skill and flair that can allow even weaker Pokémon to show their stuff amongst the best of them all. There can be even more types of competitions that could be spoken on here, but with these two, the point of importance is the same in both. They are the ways in which Pokémon are used for sports and entertainment to demonstrate how humans and Pokémon can work alongside each other to show the bonds they share and the power and skill they can possess when trained and treated properly.
Taking a step back from the Pokémon themselves for just a moment, in connection with contests and battling, we can also talk here on the way in which people contain and store Pokémon that may journey alongside, as it will add to the definition we are building here for them, and that is with capture devices.
These devices come in a wide variety of forms and shapes, but the dominant form is the capture ball, a spherical device that is used to lock onto Pokémon and attempt to capture them inside in order to register them as belonging to the person who otherwise owns the device. The system in which this all occurs and how it truly functions are top secret and known only by a scant few companies in the world, Silphco and Devoncore being the two major players in the game, but from what is known, these devices harness a unique energy matter conversion system to temporarily turn any Pokémon contained inside of them into an energy construct that can still live and breathe comfortably inside the devices, but in a much smaller form that is easier for humans to manage. This is done via an electromagnetic net of some sort that locks onto the genetic signature of a Pokémon, and thus only works when the device makes contact with an actual Pokémon, and not just any object for the most part. Even if the how of these devices' nature is not well known, they have been in use for centuries in some form or another, showing the basis of the technology to be incredibly old in origin, and a tried and tested method for bringing Pokémon into the possession of humans, though how they are treated from there varies and will be covered separately a little farther down this analysis. Regardless, it has been shown that all types of Pokémon can be captured with these sorts of devices with absolutely no true exceptions, minus the cells of Zygarde as a possible exception, though they are not considered to be true Pokémon on their own, so the argument there is moot anyways.
As far as behavior goes, Pokémon have a wide variety of different reactions to not just other Pokémon, but also to humans as well, and while these behavioral traits might share a lot in common with other non-Pokémon life forms, there are some important differences that need to be noted here.
For one thing, Pokémon are wild animals by nature, and thus do not always tend to be acted in a way that can be seen as civilized by some, but that is simply how nature works, survival of the fittest. However, despite that simple notion, it is important to state that Pokémon share a strange affinity for humans that is unseen among a lot of similar life forms. In particular, while they can be hostile towards humans, they tend to end up interacting with humans a lot more than most would think, not just from humans encroaching upon their territory, but even in just daily life for the average person. This more constant contact has resulted in many Pokémon that live around amongst humans to be easier to tame and domesticate in that manner, and this feeds right back into the notes that were previously made regarding Pokémon competitions and the Pokémon involved themselves. This is not a guarantee that all Pokémon will obey the orders and words of a human partner, of course, but it does show them to be unique behaviorally and how easy it can be to actually tame and demonstrate them if given plenty of care and attention. This has helped to link Pokémon and humans together through most of written history, and while they might still be wild creatures in standard light, their capacity to more readily bond with humans on a constant basis between many different species illustrates one of the many reasons why they have proven to be so special in the history of humanity on this planet.
And finally, for the last piece of the puzzle in building a definitive definition for what a Pokémon truly is, we need to take a look in the way in which humans and Pokémon interact outside of just competition, the ways in which we live our daily lives alongside these unique creatures.
As noted, Pokémon trainers work to make the most powerful team they can for combat, but this only scratches the surface in terms of the ways that we have come to interact with Pokémon over the course of human civilization. Outside of wild beasts of a sort for us to train and battle with in general, Pokémon can also serve as pets for others, just simple household guests that offer companionship for the sake of companionship, and while some are definitely safer to do this with than others, it nonetheless helps to make them a literal household name of sorts in the daily lives of humans. But of course, just with real-life pets, this can also help to elevate them from just something that we take care of for amusement and companionship to something far deeper, with some Pokémon being seen and treated as more like family by those that own and take care of them. They are seen less as beasts and more as connected relatives that we come to share our lives with, just as we would any family member of direct blood relation, or that have otherwise been accepted as an official part of a family unit. And this is where it would really stop for most other life forms, but this is where Pokemon truly shine, for they can do and be so much more than just this. While it is a taboo subject for some, the truth of the matter is that in ancient times, humans once treated Pokemon as just another race of beings that they shared the planet with. We saw them as equals in every sense, and with that, we do not just treat them as family. In some cases, people would marry Pokemon, and if fan content is to be taken seriously, can procreate with them to an extent. How exactly this is honestly possible is a bit of a difficult topic to broach, and I won't get into too much detail here, but suffice to say, it shows that Pokemon can even be lovers to humans, and share a much more intimate space with them than other types of life in this world. And to go even further beyond that, many of the most powerful legendary Pokemon, and some non-legendary Pokemon, have been seen as virtual gods to people across the history of our species, entities whose incredible powers command such attention and mystique that they were held up as gods to be worshipped and respected to the highest degrees imaginable. As such, it can be said with little doubt that Pokemon are incredibly special, perhaps above anything else personal here, simply because humans and they are able to live together in all levels of relationships, and thus share critical footing together socially to some extent or another.
With all of this said, at long last, I think we finally have all we really need to construct a true definition for what a Pokemon actually is. It's by all means not a short one, but did any of us ever expect it to be? Ladies and gentlemen, at long last, we finally have what I would consider to be the definitive definition for what a Pokemon is, as follows.
With all of this said, at long last, I think we finally have all that we really need to construct a true definition of what a Pokemon actually is. It's by all means not a short one, but did any of us ever expect it to be? Ladies and gentlemen, at long last, we finally have what I would consider to be the definitive definition for what a Pokemon is, as follows. Pokemon are creatures that have existed since the dawn of existence in our universe, and others, classified as life based on the sense of self-existence and defined by binomial nomenclature, though described and referred to by the colloquial names due to societal literary convenience. They are different elemental types that define the overall form based on its structure and any specialized parts they can wield naturally that amplifies their base attributes for some survival purpose, as well as abilities based on the biology and/or behavior, and moves, stats, and the capacity to hold items that can affect them and/or the Pokemon in some manner or another. While not all of them have the capacity to evolve into strong entities, those who do undergo the process do so through rapid mutation, and the different stages are considered to be distinct separate types of Pokemon. Humans and Pokemon interact with each other in many distinct ways, including different forms of competition, such as battles and contests, to show the bonds they hold together. The creatures often tethered to people through the use of captive devices, and stand out for being easier to tame and domesticate than other types of life, and for sharing much stronger societal connections than what non-Pokemon entities can share.
The journey to get to this point has been a long one for sure, but given all that we have covered, I think it helps to illustrate just how wide of a definition can be given for what these unique creatures can represent, and yet still remain concise enough to make it easy for most to understand. While there were many different pieces to this puzzle to examine, I think there, in reaching this conclusive answer, we can see that Pokemon truly are special and different from all of the known forms of life, and the way that we accept and handle that knowledge is what makes interacting with them all the more worth it for most. It is possible that, in time, new Pokemon will come along to challenge the definition that has been constructed here, but given that science is always an ever-evolving field, I find no issue in that, and I look forward to seeing what future discoveries will challenge what we know about Pokemon and how we define them in both a scientific and societal sense. Thank you all for going on this journey with me, and I'll see you all in the next episode of the VTP. Thank you all for watching this video. It always brings me great joy to see others enjoying the work I do to try and make the world of Pokemon and the fascinating creatures that lay inside of it feel as real as they possibly can. If you really enjoy my work, please feel free to leave a comment and subscribe, as I always do my best to respond to any and all comments that are left on my videos. In addition, if you wish to learn more about my work and help support it, you can find links to my Patreon page, as well as email and other contact information to my work on DeviantArt in the video description down below. Furthermore, you can find a link to my Discord server there as well if you'd like to get a first glimpse at what videos are coming up next and converse with other fans of the world of Pokemon. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and have a wonderful rest of your day.